What if I told you that a rookie in the 5th round just executed a daring contract move? Agents and NFL owners are in a frenzy, referring to it as a systemic threat. Perhaps Shedeur Sanders just rewrote. The NFL.
We've got some breaking news out of the NFL where the Browns have signed Shedeur Sanders to his $1 million deal. So Cleveland, if you remember, selected Shedeur in the 5th round of this year's draft with the 144th overall pick.
What if I told you that a draft pick in the 5th round just really turned the NFL upside down? When everyone's attention was initially round quarterbacks receiving their enormous agreements, Shedeur Sanders strolled silently and dropped a bombshell into Cleveland that includes players, agents, and owners struggling across the league. We're discussing a product known as prime equity, a provision in a contract that revolutionary enough to alter the way every NFL contract in the future is negotiated. This is no longer solely about football. People, the player in question is behaving as though he were a corporate empire, and the NFL may change forever. Listen, Shedeur was signed by the Browns, Sanders to his 4-year rookie contract, for a $0.6 million deal after choosing. In the 5th round, he was 144th overall. Everyone believed it to be just another typical quarterback selection in the late round. However, this is where it really gets crazy. This contract was no ordinary one. The first NFL contract to feature. Insiders refer to this as prime equity clauses. Furthermore, you've never heard anything like this before. You see, other rookies are simply content. In order to join the team, Shedeur entered such discussions about contracts with a very other way of thinking. He wasn't, as a player, merely negotiating. He was bargaining as a company, being a media tycoon, developing as an individual who recognizes that in 2024, your worth much surpasses what you do between the lines on Sunday.
In his pocket. That's why I said the prime equity is a concept that blends power, brand power, media leverage, and ownership mindset inspired by the legacy of Deion Coach Deion Sanders and carried forward by Shedeur Sanders. It's not a real contract clause yet, but it's a new age negotiating weapon for players like Shedeur who bring more to the table than just football talent. Ain't nobody came up with the word prime equity. A player's total value beyond the field, including their media, brand, fan base influence, content rights, merch sales, NIL history, and ability to generate attention, revenue, and culture. It's the prime way of doing business, not just playing the game, but owning the attention, audience, and upside.
What precisely is prime equity? Then, why are shockwaves being sent through front offices throughout the league? Okay, hold on tight, for this is where things get rough. Became quite captivating. The prime equity isn't merely a fancy word used in passing by agents. It is a total rethinking of NFL contracts. As stated by, according to our sources, prime equity is a player's overall worth off the field, including their media brand, followed by the base, influence, rights of material, sales of merchandise, zero history, and the capacity to produce, culture, income, and attention. However, the kicker is here. It's not merely a idea no more. In fact, it's being included as leverage in contracts. Consider it this way. As you turn, when you scroll through the first take, social media, while sports are on, highlights, how frequently do you see them? Does Sanders' name appear? The individual creates controversy, material, and discussions without attempting to. It's not a coincidence. Prime is that equity in operation, and this is a location where it becomes quite erratic. The original source indicates that this idea was influenced by Deion Sanders' legacy and continued by Shedeur Sanders. We're discussing the riches of Generations B, constructing methods that work outside of the conventional football contract. This goes beyond simply getting paid to play. This has to do with getting compensated to function as a cultural influence. However, this is what is causing NFL CEOs to lose. Take a nap at night. Shedeur is not merely inquiring for this recognition of prime equity. He's requesting it. Additionally, given what we're considering that he has the power to support it. Now, you may be wondering, he's a fifth-round pick. Come on. What? What sort of power might he possess? And that's precisely the type of outdated, school believing it's going to get inverted. Because when you examine Shedur's appearance in the media, his social media presence, his aptitude for create buzz and sources of income, totally separate from the NFL, you begin to acknowledge that perhaps the position in the traditional draft doesn't reveal the entire tale no longer. Examine his media apparatus. We are discussing Instagram Live and YouTube channels, meetings, Twitch broadcasts, and direct fan advertising. This man has created a whole environment surrounding his own brand. And this is what truly makes the NFL. Teams are anxious. He is able to make money. Every single one of this entirely separate from anything that occurs on the football pitch. Keep in mind that this player is the same one who was earning almost nothing while attending college. We are discussing brand, partnerships, sales of merchandise, streaming income. All of this is taking place when he was still a student. Now, consider what would occur if that type of NFL-level exposure meets earning power, as well as advertising prospects.
Legendary brand collabs, NIL wealth from college, independent monetization power. Quinn Ewers got drafted in the 7th round by the Miami Dolphins. And he ain't getting paid as near as much as he was getting NIL. What if these players come in the league talking about they demand that they get the minimum of their NIL money? Whatever they were making in college, they get the minimum of that coming into the NFL. That'll be a big fight, but that'll be crazy.
And this leads us to what is likely the greatest contentious aspect of the whole narrative. In the industry, there's discussion about Shedeur and other players could start requesting that their NFL contracts assure them of the bare minimum of anything they were producing and no transactions while attending college. Can you picture wouldn't that cause chaos? Our source stated, it's flawless. What if these athletes show up in the league discussing? They insist on that the least amount of their cash, whatever they're earning at college, they receive as little of that as possible. The NFL, it will be a fierce battle, but that will be insane. Consider the ramifications in this case. We might be examining a comprehensive reorganization of rookie contracts, particularly for athletes who significantly increase their earning capacity in university, as well as Shedeur Sanders with his renowned brand partnerships and self-sufficient monetization power is positioned to serve as the spokesperson for this change. However, this is where it becomes even more fascinating. The storytelling and streaming components of Shedeur can construct thanks to Prime Equity, live streaming of his own documentary series, content, and basically remove intermediaries in traditional media. We're discussing a player who is not in need of Fox Sports or ESPN to promote his brand. He may address his audience directly and make money off of that connection. The origin material offers an intriguing discovery regarding this tactic. The cold prime connection associated with death equals media audience, culture integrated into the foundation of the brand. The company has a plan for team branding and vision bargains like a proprietor. This is more than just becoming a good football player. Participant. This is about comprehending the sports industry at a level that most players don't even consider, and the link to Coach Prime. That isn't merely a family tradition. That is inherent infrastructure for brands. When you're not your father, Deion Sanders, simply passing on football expertise. You're taking on decades of media knowledge, developing a brand and knowing how to use fame as leverage for long-term riches. Thus, when Shedeur enters discussions for a deal, he's not merely saying that he is a quarterback. He is portraying himself as a member of a Media empire is a person who possesses his own audience and income, streams, as well as his own capacity to produce worth to the company that goes way, transcending victories and defeats. Now, this is where the NFL establishment actually is beginning to perspire, since this prime equity idea becomes popular if other players begin requesting comparable contracts. Structures, we might be considering a major change in the way that professionals' sports contracts are effective. We are conversing regarding players that are no longer dependent on, based only on their athletic ability to produce revenue. However, the query, everyone wants to know if the NFL truly accept these terms. Additionally, depending on the shoulders that we are witnessing, contract, the solution may be more intricate than you may imagine. Due to the problem with prime equity is that makes it extremely effective as a bargaining tool. Instrument, it goes beyond what the brings to the table. It concerns realizing that in the media of today landscape, the appropriate player can produce enormous worth for a company even when they're not playing. Consider, from Cleveland's point of view, they're getting more than just a quarterback. When Shedeur Sanders is signed, they're gaining access to all of his media ecosystem, his following, and his capacity to create excitement and awareness for the franchise. It's valuable stuff, particularly for a group that has been battling to obtain national focus, as well as a fictitious contract provision that has been circulating. It's utterly insane. We are discussing incentives for viewers and content ownership, rights and revenue shares from merchandising. This is how a football player is treated, an executive in the entertainment sector. The MAC contract has clauses for a bonus of $2 million if Shedeur is officially content from Twitch, Instagram, or YouTube gets 10 million views overall throughout the regular season. Let me say it again, that we are discussing NFL contracts that incorporate performance on social media. Bonuses, this has never happened before. Territory, however, this is what's actually revolutionary in terms of the content. Clause of ownership. Shedeur would keep exclusive right of ownership for all, not a member of the crew behind the scenes. Footage shot throughout the NFL season. This implies live documentary series, vault-style content, and streaming. Every single one of that remains with him. The NFL doesn't receive to manage or profit from his personal merchandising and the brand content. Share of revenue, 20% of the entire team. Sales of items that prominently displays his name, image, or authorized brand. Catchphrases that goes beyond simply being compensated to play. That's receiving payment each time a fan purchases a t-shirt, jersey, or any item of merchandise bearing his name. Now, our source was entirely convinced regarding whether or not teams would genuinely agree to a few of them more severe clauses, particularly the brand equity match provision that would enable the athlete to jointly invest in upcoming team-related media initiatives. However, the reality that these discussions are even taking place on shows, the extent of the landscape's change. In actuality, gamers such as Shedeur, the NFL is not necessary for Sanders to achieve that. Money no more. They have their own sources of income. They have direct their viewers access, and they've possessed the capacity to produce revenue far outside of the conventional football-related structures that modifies the complete power dynamic and contract discussions. Additionally, this is where the idea of prime equity becomes so strong. It goes beyond simply obtaining paid more. Getting paid is the main concern. In a different way, it's important to understand that a player's overall worth in 2024 consists of their cultural influence, their media presence, impact, their capacity to produce discussions and material that motivate, income. Coach Prime's response to inquiries regarding the deal by stating, "We construct, not sign contracts." Legalities wasn't merely a cool sound. Bite, that was entirely different. Views on how professional athletes ought to approach their careers. Because this is what's actually taking place. Behind the scenes, the NFL is about to begin to understand that they require players such as Shedeur Sanders, more than those athletes. Require the NFL when you are able to produce millions of dollars and millions of views, an income and enormous cultural impact entirely on their own. Suddenly, the conventional power structure begins to change. And just that, what's going on with this good stock? Revolution. Gamers are no longer only workers. They're turning into a business. Collaborators, media, and content producers. Football player who is also a mogul. However, this is where things really get intriguing from a group standpoint. Cleveland signed more than simply Shedeur Sanders as they required a quarterback. He was signed because they acknowledged that his primary equity worth might change their whole. The cultural and media presence of the franchise. Significance. Consider it. What time was the last time anyone discussed this quarterback dilemma for the Browns? Degree of enthusiasm and focus? When was the last fifth-round selection made? Created this much excitement and talk? Prime equity is that in take action. Additionally, it's precisely the type of value that contemporary NFL teams are beginning to understand their need. The speculation over Shedeur's potential ultimately become the starter's additions, an additional depth to the entire narrative. According to the source, GM Andrew Berry, as well as the coaching staff, having a competitive strategy, possibly providing Dillon Gabriel and others had a prior opportunity. Sugar takes over. Here's the problem, though. Even if he doesn't begin immediately, the value of his core equity is still producing profits for the company. Every time his name appears in the media whenever someone speaks regarding the quarterback situation for Browns, each time a fan purchases goods or participates in team content in part because importance of his presence, that's all transcends a conventional quarterback. Data. Additionally, this is what makes the idea of prime equity is groundbreaking. It's not only about giving players rewards for victories and touchdowns. It concerns acknowledging that in today's media landscape, the appropriate player can produce enormous worth for a company in methods that are unrelated to what takes place on Sunday afternoons. What then? What does this portend for the NFL's future? Agreements? What does this imply for other players who may wish to engage in negotiations? Comparable offers? And above all, how does this affect the league as a whole? Complete? If this prime equity, then, if revolution gains traction, we might be observing the total change of how contracts for professional sports operate. We are discussing players who are no longer only athletes. They're entertainers, producers of material and brands, ambassadors as well as business associates, combined into one. However, this is what's truly going to astound you. This is only the start. Should Shedeur Sanders, able to bargain for premium equity, provisions of his NFL contract, if he is able to demonstrate the effectiveness of this model and creates benefits for the player and the company, followed by each other, player who is well known in the media, and the beginning of brand power, requesting the same treatment. Additionally, that's when things start to get interesting, due to the fact that the NFL is suddenly not simply fighting against other leagues of sports for ability. They are up against social, streaming services, media platforms, and autonomous production of content, chances that could be more profitable than conventional football. Agreements. It is not an issue of whether the NFL will be altered by prime equity. The query is how soon and how that transformation will occur dramatically. Additionally, given what we're witnessing with Shedeur Sanders' groundbreaking agreement, which change may be occurring much more quickly, more than anyone anticipated. The future is this. of empowering athletes, people. This is what occurs when players lose their ability to think like workers and begin to consider. Proprietors and Shedeur Sanders. His prime equity revolution just possibly the player who undergoes a transformation. Everything. How do you feel about this? Idea of prime equity? Are we observing NFL contracts future? Or is this only an astute negotiating strategy that not going to catch on? And above all, do you believe that more gamers ought to begin requesting the same level of service from their groups? Tell me in the comments below. I'd want to know your thoughts regarding this rumbling revolution, the whole league. Additionally, if you'd like to keep up with the most recent NFL headlines about contracts and player empowerment, tales and behind-the-scenes information, things the media won't report on, you be sure to hit the subscribe button. That alert, due to trust. For me, the narrative of Shedeur Sanders is simply the start of several significant changes that will occur to professional athletics. Sign up today for additional breaking NFL insider information